And good afternoon. My name is Evan Weiner, and good to be with you this afternoon. Actually, I was in Queens this morning for the first time in a long, long time, and it was nice to be on Queens Boulevard. Anyway, thank you, Katie, for inviting me, and I'm going to talk about how Lucille Ball, of all people, was one of the most powerful business women, not only in Hollywood, but in the United States in the 1960s, at a time when women like Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem, Bella Abzug, whose chief of staff was my aunt, Pearl Berkowitz, were trying to rally women together to become more powerful as a group. Well, Lucy did it, and she did it on her own, and she's probably, you would not expect it from somebody from Jamestown, New York, who was a failure basically in show business until she was about 37 years old. But she was the head of Desilu, which was a powerful television producer back in the 1960s. And she's the mother of Star Trek, because without Lucy, there is no Star Trek. Lucille Ball was born in Jamestown, New York on August 6, 1911. Her father, who was a telephone lineman in the early days of telephones in the United States, died when she was 4. And it was just Lucille and her mother, Desiree, along with her father and mother, Fred and Flora Bell Hunt. Fred Hunt would get Lucy in trouble in 1936. One of the obstacles Lucy had to overcome to become this businesswoman that she became in the 1960s. She's the most unlikely of Hollywood moguls. At the age of 17, she left her upstate New York high school for Broadway, like so many others, looking to trip the light fantastic. And, you know, for every star that ever became a Hollywood star, Broadway star, there are thousands upon thousands who never made it. And she was told by everybody, you just don't have it. Just go home. You don't have it. Lucy came up with the idea of Desilu Studios about 2 decades after rejection, after rejection, after rejection, after rejection. Desilu without Desi is Lucy. And Desilu Productions comes up with the show, Star Trek. Lucy says, I want to do this over the objections of her board, mostly people who work with Desi and Lucy on the I Love Lucy, or in the I Love Lucy era. And twice they had Star Trek in front of them, and twice they said no, and twice Lucy said yes. The executive, she rebuilt the studio in the 1960s and was Hollywood's most powerful businesswoman. In 1962, she bought out Desi Arnaz to have complete control of the company. She was the first woman to own a major studio. 3 of her shows went on to become successful movie franchises: Mission Impossible, Star Trek, and The Untouchables. But back in the day when Lucy was trying to become famous, or at least get a job as an actor, in the late 1920s, she was a model. And she was a model for cigarettes for the most part. And then she decides to go out to Hollywood. And she does land a job as a Goldwyn girl. She got a part in something called The Roman Scandals, which was starring Eddie Cantor, who at that time was a huge, huge, huge star, making Whoopi and among other things, his big hits. But she was just somebody. She's just another body in a movie as a Goldwyn girl. But she decided, hey, you know what? I like this Hollywood thing. I'm going to try to succeed in Hollywood. And she does by becoming a stunt girl. And then she gets noticed by Buster Keaton, who is a big silent star of the 1920s, and he sees something in her. He's the only one who sees something in her, but he sees something in her. And he helps her with her timing and shows her how to use props for laughs. He even demonstrated to her how to perform physical comedy without getting hurt. And then he decided, you know what, she's good enough to actually be in some pictures. So he calls up Columbia Pictures and says, hey, you know what? I think this woman can really help out, particularly in the Three Stooges short. And Lucille Ball does make her debut with Columbia in a Three Stooges short. And there she is with Curly Howard, Mo Howard, and Larry Fine, or the law firm of Howard Fine and Howard. And it's in this particular short that Lucy does get some notice. And she credited the Stooges with helping her out with comedy. So she lands a contract with Harry Cohn and Columbia Pictures, and she's cast in a short film with the Three Stooges called The Three Little Pigskins. And that's her first venture into the world of comedy, and certainly not her last venture. She would always credit the Stooges with introducing her to slapstick and physical comedy. But Columbia Pictures wasn't all that interested in Lucy. The boss, Harry Cohn, didn't think she had any talent. So she goes on to RKO. She's in another movie called Stage Door. Gregory LaCava is cast as the brown hair Ball. She had brown hair. She was a brunette in those days, to play Ginger Rogers' dance partner in Stage Door, which starred Katharine Hepburn. And Miller is also in there along with Eve Arden. Eve Arden would have a long relationship with Desi and Lucy. In fact, in 1966, there was a show called The Mothers-in-Law, which was produced by Desi Arnaz. He was long gone from Desilu at that point and was doing his own thing. And he hires Eve Arden. The movie was RKO's big effort of the year. It was a hit at the box office, but doesn't do anything for Lucy's career. She's still just another person on the studio lot. She does end up with the Marx Brothers and Miller's in that picture too, in room service. She would move to RKO Pictures, appear with the Marx Brothers in room service. But she struggled for many, many years in Hollywood during the early years of her career. She did everything from drama films to romantic comedies through the 30s and 40s, and she got noticed somewhat. She was the queen of the B pictures, and the B pictures were usually the second picture that you saw on Saturdays in the movie theaters. But she was not getting the notice that she had hoped, and the studio operators weren't giving her the notice or didn't think much of her ability. She would meet Desi Arnaz in 1940. She was 29 years old. He was 21 years old. And she falls in love with Desi Arnaz. She's in the film, 1940, Dance Girl Dance. She appears in the role of Bubbles. But she's in another movie later that year. It's called Too Many Girls, and Desi Arnaz is in that movie. And they star in this movie called Too Many Girls. And they fall in love. And they elope in November of 1940. Ball's showbiz schedule, Arnaz is always on tour because he has a big band. They rarely saw one another. And Lucille Ball files for divorce from Desi in 1944. She hears about his drinking, infidelity. After all, he's only at that point about, 25 years old, and she's 33. But they soon reconcile. She's still in the B movies. Here she is with Eddie Albert, the Fuller Brush Girl, Columbia Pictures. She's bouncing around Hollywood at this point. So she stars in a string of several feature-length comedies, including her husband's affairs with Franchot Tony. Miss Grant Takes Richmond with William Holden, The Fuller Brush Girl with Eddie Albert, and two with Bob Hope, Sorrowful Jones and Fancy Pants. But does television kill the radio star? Because Lucille Ball finally hits the big time on radio. And radio is still in its golden age when she hits the big time with a show called My Favorite Husband. But it wasn't supposed to be. It was just supposed to be a filler show, just the one-time special, because another show, Our Miss Brooks, wasn't ready to go on the air. So CBS had to do something. So they patched together the show called My Favorite Husband. It was a one-time special on CBS, July 5th, 1948. But it scores well with the audience. And Our Miss Brooks had a problem getting on the air that week. So, hey, it's an audition show, and it's good. It's good. So CBS finds a place for it, And that puts Lucille Ball on the road to become the most powerful woman in Hollywood. Let's talk a little bit about the radio show. Lucille Ball and Lee Bowman played the characters of Liz and George Cooper. And there was a very positive response to this broadcast, and CBS said, you know what, we're going to do this as a series. George Bowman wasn't available, or rather Lee Bowman wasn't available to play the character George. It debuts in late July, and it's Lucille Ball and Richard Denning as the leads. And it is really, really popular. There is Lucy and there is Richard Denning, my favorite husband. And it lays the groundwork for I Love Lucy. Lucille Ball, Richard Denning, they're out front. But the show is written by Jess Oppenheimer, Madeline Pugh, and Bob Carroll Jr. And Lucy likes them. She thinks they're great. These writers are really, really playing into her power as a performer. And she would have these writers go with her to I Love Lucy. Denning would not be able to move to the new medium TV because he was busy with other things. Radio show becomes I Love Lucy. My Favorite Husband. Two people live together and like it. My Favorite Husband was the first radio series to star motion picture comedy performer Lucille Ball. Her co-star on the CBS comedy show was Richard Denning. Ball and Denning were Liz and George Cooper, a happy couple who would get themselves in all kinds of domestic scraps. It was sort of a forerunner to TV's I Love Lucy. Jess Oppenheimer, Madeline Pugh, and Bob Carroll Jr. wrote those scripts. They would later do the Lucy scripts. Their best friends were Gail Gordon, who played Rudolph Atterbury, and his wife Iris, who was played by B. Benedette. Sounds like the TV show is the same as the radio show, right? You got Wilbur Hatch, who did the music for I Love Lucy. Gail Gordon was not available for the show, nor was B. So they were replaced by two other actresses, or actors and actresses. And Jell-O Pudding was involved in putting the I Love Lucy show on the road to TV. But a few things happened, and not too many of them were good. CBS approached Lucille Ball, do the weekly show on television. She said, yeah, let's do it. She jumps at the chance. But she's going to be the star, and she's going to be the boss. And she is going to run this TV show. After all, Gertrude Berg is running the Goldbergs on TV. Why can't she? Her first requirement for any show becomes a major, major, major problem. Why? Well, her first requirement was that Desi Arnaz, who is Cuban, plays her husband on the television show. And there's a reason for this, because Lucy is having problems with her marriage, and she feels that if she could get Desi Arnaz off the road with his band and get him home and work with him on this TV show, maybe to save the marriage. Could be to save their marriage. But the CBS executive said, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this at all. Because he's Cuban. You're American. No, we can't do this. This is an interracial marriage. What's wrong? I'm married to him. No, can't do it. So CBS and Jell-O, the potential sponsors, or this potential sponsor, Jell-O, thought that the American public would never accept Desi as the husband of a red-blooded American girl. Won't happen. CBS and Jell-O insisted that the radio co-star Richard Denning can continue as a co-star on the TV show. Well, Jell-O would drop out, and they would be replaced by Philip Morris, the cigarette manufacturer, as the sponsor of the show. Lucy also wanted to save her marriage. And this is the way she's going to save her marriage, working with her husband on the TV show. They were married. Yeah, they were married. In 1950, when the show was proposed, Desi was 31 years old. Lucy was 39 years old. Hey, but they were married, and they were going to either do it or not do it. They were going to be a couple or not a couple. That was Lucy's demand. Ball told CBS, you either have both of us or none of us. Eventually, CBS said, okay, you're doing real well on radio. You work with us. Yeah, okay. We'll listen to you. You know, Desi was Cuban, has this strong accent, and he mangles words and like explain, splain, and you know, Lucy and all that other stuff. In a sense, Desi and Lucy were an interracial couple, or at least a multi-ethnic couple. And here's the problem that CBS had. That is Rutherford B. Hayes. Here's the president of the United States between 1877 and 1881. And you're probably saying, well, how does Rutherford B. Hayes have anything to do with talking about? Well, he has actually a lot to do with it, because Rutherford B. Hayes was installed as president in a deal, because he and Samuel Tilden in 1876, there were some questions about who actually won that presidential election. Desi and Lucy are married. Now, we're talking about 74 years later. What happened here? American civil rights movement had been stalled since 1875. Desegregation in the South ended with the Hayes-Tilden presidential race in 1876. Hayes became the president. The Democrats said to the Republicans, we'll let you have Hayes as president, but you got to do something for us. This is more important to us than actually having the Oval Office. The Democrats wanted federal troops out of the South, and they got what they wanted by giving up the Oval Office, and that ends Reconstruction. At that point, interracial marriage was illegal in more than a dozen states. By 1950, interracial marriage was illegal in 17 states and would continue to be illegal until 1967, a case that went before the Supreme Court. Richard Loving versus Virginia. Loving was married to Mildred Jeter. They got married in Washington, decided to move back to Virginia, and they were arrested because interracial marriage was illegal. The case goes up to the Supreme Court. It's decided by a 6-3 decision in 1967. That ends the ban on illegal marriage in 17 states in the United States. We're talking about 1950 when when interracial marriage was illegal in the United States. To prove that they could work together, they formed Desilu Productions, and they go on tour throughout the United States in 1950 to show that they can work before an audience. So this is the summer of 1950, and they are trying to convince audiences that they would be believable as husband and wife, even though they were a husband and wife. In early 1951, they put up $5,000 of their own money to do essentially the I Love Lucy show. And they filmed the pilot, got it over to CBS, and CBS took the production. But there were some deal breakers here. Lucy was the boss. She wanted to film before a live audience. And she wanted a guy by the name of Carl Frund to be the cinematographer of the new show. Oh, and another thing. I'm going to do the show in Los Angeles. We're not doing the show out of New York. Most of the shows were done in New York. A show was done in Chicago. In fact, the Colgate Comedy Hour was done in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York on NBC on Sunday nights through microwave connections and all kind of cables and all kind of other things. But she said, we're going to be in Los Angeles where you don't get the show. Shows that were shot in New York were shot in kinescope and sent out to various stations. They didn't look good. Didn't look good at all when they were replayed later on. Hence, let us do something else. And Lucy and the I Love Lucy show was a pioneering show for the use of multiple simultaneously filming cameras and a live studio audience. And it was shot on 35 millimeter film rather than broadcast live. So the show would be pristine and it would look good, particularly to rural audiences if they had a television show or a television station in their area. And these were all they weren't all first, but virtually first in the television industry because of Lucy. Groucho was filmed the You Bet Your Life show. Also filmed were shows that included your Showtime, the Stu Irwin Show, and The Life of Riley by William Bendix. A guy by the name of Jerry Fairbanks had developed and was using multiple camera film production for TV in 1950. You Bet Your Life used a multiple camera film setup before a live studio the year before the I Love Lucy show starts. Lucy knows talent. She knows talent inside out. She was in all of those movies. She could see who was good. She could see who wasn't good. And she picked a lot of talent for Desi Loeb. Now, Desi Arnaz worked on the business end and some technical things, but it was Lucy who had an eye for talent and had an eye for shows. And she knew that Desi was perfect for her. Desi had good comedic timing, an expressive face, was flustered as the husband, Ricky Ricardo. He mispronounced and Latinized words, and that was funny. And within 4 months of its debut, Lucy was the #1 rated show in New York, and a national audience would soon follow. And it's a smash hit. And here is the replica of, or repeating what was on radio. Instead of Richard Denning, there is Desi Arnaz as the husband. And instead of Bea and Gail, here's Vivian Vance and William Frawley as the Mertzes. It is the same show, it just goes to TV. And in those days, that happened. Jack Benny went with the same show to TV. Dragnet from 1951 went over from radio to television. And other shows just went over. Eventually, Major Beau's Amateur Radio Hour, or Amateur Hour on radio, became the Ted Mack Amateur Hour on TV. So TV was just taking shows that were on radio and just putting them in front of a camera, and I Love Lucy is that. CBS has a smash hit, but there are problems on the horizon. The show is expensive. Lucy and Desi agreed to pay for the increase in production costs, provided that they, not CBS, own rights to the film. It's the first time the network doesn't own a show. They own the show, or a primetime show. This would be a brilliant business move because nobody at the time thought anybody would want to watch a rerun in 1951, much less 2021. 70 years later, and there are people still watching reruns of the I Love Lucy show from 1951. The deal? Desi and Lucy received ownership rights to I Love Lucy in exchange for a $1,000 salary pay cut, which today would be about $8,000. Then Lucy becomes pregnant. And this is a major, major problem because you can't say pregnant on television. You can't say pregnant on television. She's pregnant. And they almost end the show because they found out she's going to have a second baby. And in 1952, America, 69 years ago, it was considered too racy for a visibly pregnant woman to be on TV, or to be in a movie, or to be on Broadway, or to be wherever they were performing. Television had censorship, major censorship. The first censorship was supposed to be somebody other than Desi playing the part of what became Ricky Ricardo. Lucy and Desi were not allowed to say the word pregnant on TV, even though she was pregnant. So Jess Oppenheimer comes to the rescue and figures something out. The guy, Jess Oppenheimer, is on the left. He's the show's producer, and he's the head writer, so he has an idea. Let's write Ball's pregnancy into the TV show. What could go wrong? She's pregnant. A visibly pregnant woman never appeared on stage or television before, so this is a major, major risk in 1952 America. Lucy, Desi, Oppenheimer from the creative end, CBS, and the show's sponsor, Philip Morris, well, they had to agree to this. And there's some negotiations here. Lucy is pregnant. The show is popular. If the show wasn't popular, they would have gotten rid of the show immediately. But the storyline works. CBS allowed Lucy to appear on screen during her pregnancy, and some of the scripts did address the topic. However, the executives at CBS wanted to make sure the episodes wouldn't cause too much of a stir because, you know, being pregnant offended somebody's sensibility in the United States in 1952. And there is Lucy and Desi, Desilu Studios. In the fall, when I was beginning to look pretty big, we did several shows concerning my pregnancy, Lucille Ball said. These films were screened by a priest, a minister, and a rabbi for any possible violation of good taste. Good taste, she's pregnant, she's having a kid. It was the CBS network that objected to using the word pregnant. They made us say expecting. A priest, a minister, and a rabbi watch a TV show. The three-man religious committee protested. What's wrong with pregnant? They were heartily in favor of what we were doing, showing motherhood as a happy, wholesome, normal family event. She survives the pregnancy. In fact, it goes so well, and there is Lucy and Desi on the set as she is pregnant. In fact, it goes so well that they beat Dwight Eisenhower in the ratings. But before we get to the inaugural on January 20th, 1953, Lucy was pregnant and she could not do the entire 39-episode production schedule and missed the program. At that point in TV, you just show the program once. And that was it. You never saw it again. It was gone forever. And so this creates a problem. So Desi sits down with Jess Oppenheimer and they say, okay, this is our second year. How about if we go back to last year and just pull a couple of the episodes up and put it on? Let's see what happens. And they do it. And the reruns were rating winners. And out of an accident or out of the pregnancy, created a new area for television called syndication. Show the rerun. Show it a third time. Show it a fourth time. Show it a fifth time. Jerry Seinfeld is grateful for that, among other people, like Jennifer Aniston and others, because they made millions of dollars off of this idea that Desi and Jess Oppenheimer came up with. So Desilu Studios invents the concept of the rerun, and they use their profits from the shows or the syndication or the reruns, and they're funding the growth of their studio. Lucy and Desi are television's first millionaires because they came up with these ideas because Lucy was pregnant and they were able to sell the shows again and again and again and again and make money off of things that they didn't have to do anymore. They were there. Ike swearing in, Dwight Eisenhower becomes the president of the United States on January 20th, 1953. Oh, Dick Nixon's there. I knew Dick Nixon. I did know Dick Nixon, starring in 1985. Anyway, Eisenhower becomes president. That's January 20th. On January 19th, 1953, Lucy gives birth on TV, or the TV show, to little Ricky. And that gets a lot of ratings. 44 million Americans watched the show on January 16th, 1953. Dwight Eisenhower got about 25 million viewers for his inauguration. Lucy was a smash. But you think everything is going well for Lucy. She survives the fact that CBS doesn't want Desi. She survives the pregnancy, or expecting. But another problem comes up. And it starts in 1947 or so with a Hollywood Reporter. And the Hollywood Reporter puts out an unsourced story about communists all over the place in Hollywood. And that leads to red channels, and that leads to the House on Un-American Activities. And it leads to suspicions. That one a communist, that one's a communist. And it leads to studio bosses turning in their stars or their actors or their players. It leads to other actors spilling their guts on who they know that they think that they are communists, and to save their careers, and to throw out or just to ruin somebody else's career. And this is what's going on in the 1950s. They're canceling out careers in the 1950s. And Lucy's got a problem. take a look at that affidavit of registration for her to become or to vote in 1936. Miss Lucille D. Ball, 1344 North Ogden Drive East. North Ogden Drive, 1344. She's an actress, and she signs with the Communist Party. Communist Party. And that causes her all sorts of issues because here you got it. You got the proof. She's a communist. Americans, don't patronize Reds. This is the 1950s. You could drive the Reds out of television, radio, and Hollywood. This track will tell you how. Why we must drive them out. The Reds have made our screen, radio, and TV Moscow's most effective fifth column in America. The Reds of Hollywood and Broadway have always been the chief financial support of communist propaganda in America. Our own films made by Red producers, directors, writers, and stars being used by Moscow in Asia, Africa, the Balkans, and throughout Europe to create hatred of America. Right now, films are being made to craftedly glorify Marxism, UNESCO, and one-worldism via your television set. They're being piped into your living room, and they're poisoning the minds of your children under your very eyes. So remember, if you patronize a film made by Red producers, writers, stars, and studios, you are aiding and abetting communism. Every time you permit Reds to come into your living room via your TV set, you're helping Moscow and the internationalists to destroy America. Well, they don't name any Reds here. They don't name them at all. They just throwing out that, well, there are communists there, and you got to do something about it. The blacklisting of performers and writers and other people involved the practice of denying employment to the entertainment industry professionals believed to have been communists or communist sympathizers. Not just actors, but screenwriters, directors, musicians, and other American entertainment professionals were barred from work by the studio. People like Zero Mostel, who survived the blacklisting. Some did, some didn't. Pert Kelton did survive the blacklisting eventually. And Lucy could be thrown into the category with these people. She had heart problems. Well, before we talk about the heart problems, let's see what problems she had. In 1951, Pert Kelton was the original Alice Cramden in The Honeymooners, which was on Dumont TV, comedy sketches on the Dumont Television Network's Cavalcade of Stars. She was abruptly dropped from her role because she was blacklisted and she was replaced by Audrey Meadows. Rather than acknowledge that she was blacklisted, the producers and Jackie Gleason explained that her departure was based on alleged heart problems. They wouldn't say that she was a communist, she had heart problems. Kelton ended up okay because she ended up with Jackie Gleason in the 1960s playing Alice Cramden's mother-in-law in the shows out of Miami. Hazel Scott. Hazel Scott was the first African-American woman to host a television show in the United States on the Dumont Network, a 15-minute weekly show. She was also married to Adam Clayton Powell III, the Harlem congressman. And she was not born in the United States. She was born in Jamaica. And she had sort of a film career in the 1940s. She was a Juilliard graduate, a pianist, a great pianist. You could go up on YouTube and actually watch her playing the piano. And she gets by as a vocalist, but being a vocalist isn't really her talent. Her talent is playing the piano. But Hazel Scott runs into a problem. The show comes to an abrupt end, the Hazel Scott show on the Dumont Network, after a few months because Red Channels, and again, no sourcing of information, just throwing out a name without providing any substance to say why she is a communist. So again, she's named in Red Channels, a pamphlet that listed supposed communist sympathizers in entertainment. So she decides, you know what, I'm going to go clear my name. I'm going to go to the House on Un-American Activities Committee. I am going to speak to them and defend myself. But by the time she gets there, her sponsors desert her, and within a week, Dumont decides to drop the show. Hazel Scott would have to go to Europe to make a living, and she too would come back to America eventually in 1970 on General Hospital. And then there is the story of the late Philip Loeb, Zero Mostel's friend. Philip Loeb, and a friend of others too. In 1955, the actor Philip Loeb checked himself into the Taft Hotel in Midtown Manhattan under his false name and took a fatal dose of sleeping pills. He was accused of being a communist, and he couldn't find any work. 6 years earlier, he was the co-star of television's first situation comedy, which preceded I Love Lucy, The Goldbergs, created by Gertrude Berg. Gertrude Berg didn't want to get rid of him and was pressured and pressured and pressured by NBC, David Sarnoff, and then Dumont, where the show ended up, to get rid of Loeb. She would. The show died in the ratings. The Goldbergs were about a Jewish family assimilating into America, and George Washington's portrait was right in the middle of the set. Zero Mostel wrote a whole bunch of essays and papers about Philip Loeb, and some of it's been performed on TV. It's up there, and Mostel names of people who he thought were his friends who decided to go along with the studio bosses, and also with the House on Un-American Activities to just destroy careers. Philip Loeb was one of those careers that was destroyed, and he took his life. McCarthyism and blacklisting and blackballing. The Fight for America by Senator Joe McCarthy. And Lucille Ball is right in the crosshairs. She could become Pert Kelton. She could become Philip Loeb. She could become Hazel Scott, but she doesn't. For whatever reason, she doesn't. Lucille Ball gave a voluntary testimony to an investigator for the House on Un-American Activities Committee back on September 4th, 1953. And she blamed her grandfather. She said, "It was our grandfather, Fred Hunt. He just wanted us to do, and we just did something to please him. I didn't intend to vote that way. As I recall, I didn't. But that might not have been good enough. This was probably better." The FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, was a big fan of the I Love Lucy show. And that probably saved Lucy from being blacklisted, because J. Edgar Hoover could pull some strings. I don't know if he did or didn't, but he was a big fan of the I Love Lucy show. Yeah, Lucille Ball did swear to the House committee she had never knowingly aided the Communist Party, aside from placating her grandfather's many requests for a room in the garage to organize with friends. In her autobiography, Lucille observed in herself a strong conservative, Puritan streak, and proclaimed, "I'm the most conservative member of my family." It was for her grandfather, a progressive and a free thinker, that she registered as a communist. And she would hold a news conference denying that she was a communist. Yeah, there's evidence she signed to vote in 1936 and was a member of the Communist Party, at least to vote. But here's a news conference, and Lucy and Desi are faced with saving not only the I Love Lucy show, but the entire business, the entire Desi Lou Enterprises, the show, the studio, everything. And they do. She pulls it off. Before the filming of episode 68 of the I Love Lucy show, which would be second, third season, entitled "The Girls Go Into Business," Desi Arnaz addresses the accusation of Lucy being a communist while doing his usual studio audience warm-up. He reuses a line that was in the Heather Hopper column. Heather Hopper was a big gossip columnist in those days. And the line was, "The only thing red about Lucy is her hair. And even that is not legitimate." She was a brunette. That's what she was, a brunette, until she was at the studio. She was with MGM in the early 1940s, and the Hairstylist Sydney Gelleroff changed her hair from brown to red. It was for a 1943 movie. DeBerry Was a Lady, where she debuted her new hair color to movie audiences, and she got the nickname after that of Technicolor Tessie. She was not a natural redhead. Oh, it was a tough gig. I Love Lucy was a really, really tough gig for her. She caught colds. Well, we all catch colds. She had crying spells. She broke 2 fingers doing a stunt on the show. She sprained her ankle 3 times, pulled a tendon, lost 19 pounds. She came down with a virus, had to go on hiatus while she recovered at the beach. She fainted on stage. She fainted on stage another time, and the production company set up an oxygen tank for her in the wings, and she fainted again. So she had some physical problems. She had the communist problem. She had the pregnancy problem. She had the interracial marriage problem, but the show was #1. And the show became worth a lot of money. That is Lucy in 1956. She's 45 years old at this point. Show had been on at this point 5 years, and it's taking a toll. In 1957, CBS and Desi and Lucy cut a deal. CBS buys the rights to the previously shown Lucy episodes in 1957. So you're talking about 1951 to 1956. And with that, the rerun industry was born, and CBS would show the old I Love Lucy's all over the place in their schedule. Also, with that money, Lucy and Desi would take that money and purchase the RKO studio lot in Hollywood to film other shows. $5 million probably today is worth somewhere between $40 and $60 million. But they decide we're going to get the old RKO lot. And we're going to make that available to other shows and make some money off of it. And they did. Filmed in Hollywood by Desi Loeb. Desi Loeb would buy a lot in Culver City, and that would be the outdoor setting for several films, including The Andy Griffith Show, Mission Impossible, Hogan's Heroes, Batman, Star Trek, That Girl, and many, many others. Oh, whatever happened to my favorite husband? Well, it's an interesting story because they didn't use it on radio anymore because Lucy was gone and Richard Denning wasn't around. But it saw a second life on television. And it starts in 1953. This is a 1955 still from that show. CBS put My Favorite Husband on television in 1953, starring Joan Caulfield and Barry Nelson as Liz and George Cooper. The television version ran 2.5 seasons from September 1953 through December 1955. The first 2 years produced live at the CBS Television City studio. And then Lucy and Desi, or Lucy, gets involved in the show again because they start filming it at Desi Loeb. There were only a few episodes that were filmed, but My Favorite Husband never completely disappeared from Lucille Ball's life. They decide to pack it in, Lucy and Desi, after the 1957 season. Just became a strain on both of them, and they agree, well, we'll still do some television, but not the way we were doing it. In 1957, Desi was done with a half-hour sitcom format. He turns down an offer, $80,000 per episode, which now is about $800,000 per episode from CBS, plus $30,000 per repeat for another season. He could have made a lot of money off of it, but didn't do it. 39 episodes a year, do the math, and that comes out to quite a bit of change. Comes out to about 32, it comes out to what, 3 shows is 240,000. It comes out to over $3 million, plus the 30,000 repeat, which is another $1 million. Desi Loeb would strike a deal with Ford. They'd get $2.5 million. 5 Lucy and Desi specials. Desi had some health problems, and that leads to the decision to end the show. They have other shows going on. The Ann Southern show is on. The Untouchables. Lucy was partially responsible for bringing the American television production of shows from New York to Los Angeles, and they decided to sit back and maybe launch other shows, do something else, and get out of the daily grind of weekly TV. There was another show called the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. That was Lucy's baby. It ran on CBS between 1958 and 1960. And 3 of their episodes would serve as pilots for other TV shows. One of them would be the Twilight Zone, 1 episode. And Lucy and Desi would produce the Untouchables, 2 episodes, and that would become a big smash with ABC TV. Lucy also made her debut as a producer with a 1959 episode of the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. Rod Serling, of course, was the brains behind the Twilight Zone. And it was Desi and Lucy that introduced him to Hollywood TV. Serling wrote a piece called The Time Element, which starred William Bendix. The show got really positive reviews, and Serling would go to CBS and say, hey, how about it? I could do this every week. Why don't you let me do this every week? And they said, sure. Science fiction, fantasy, anthology series, which would be called The Twilight Zone. And that starts in 1959, but it really starts with Lucy and Desi Loeb. And the Untouchables, that's the other one. These are the Untouchables, and Robert Stack is there with the machine gun, 3rd from the left. I spent one night with Robert Stack at a baseball game in the 1980s. Nice enough guy, didn't say very much to me. In fact, didn't say anything at all. I also spent a couple of nights with Terry Gare. Remember her, Terry Gare? She got multiple sclerosis. And we were just watching baseball games together because I was at Yankee Stadium covering the Yankees, my radio job. And the actors would sit with us. And so I got to sit with Robert Stack, got to sit with Terry Gare and others. The Desilu Playhouse aired a 2-part drama called The Untouchables. Paul Manosh adapted the 1957 memoirs of the Treasury agent Elliot Ness, who was played by Stack. CBS wasn't too impressed with the show. The Untouchables would become a hit series with ABC. It would run for 4 seasons, 1959 to 1963. ABC was half the network in those days. CBS didn't want the show. Turned out to be very profitable and turned out to be a movie eventually. The split comes in 1960. There is Lucy and there is Desi, but they split as friends. They decided that they could figure out their divorce better than the lawyers, and so they figured out what they were going to do and not going to do without too much help from lawyers. But she does file for divorce in 1960. She charged Desi with extreme cruelty, subjecting her to grievous mental suffering. I tried so hard to be fair and solve our problem, she said at the time, but now I find it impossible to go on. The split was amicable, and they remained friends, and more importantly, business partners. 1962, Desi says to Lucy, we're dying. The business is going absolutely nowhere. You got to get back in front of the camera. She doesn't want to get back in front of the camera, but the business is faltering. The Ann Southern Show, Angel, and Guess What Ho were canceled. And that left the company with just the Untouchables. And there were some problems with the Untouchables because groups were protesting the Untouchables because of the Italian characters and the mob. And Desi got some got some friendly phone calls and letters saying that maybe, just maybe, some of the Italian names should be changed. They were, and the show started to die. So Desi calls Lucy and says, we got to do something here. We got to get some money into the company. How about it? You want to go back? I don't know. CBS is, I don't know. But CBS is finally, yeah, okay, we'll do it. Lucy says, okay, I'll come back. But there are conditions. And CBS, oh no, conditions again. What are the conditions? Vivian Vance has to be in the show. She has to be my best friend, like I Love Lucy. And oh, and by the way, we want that Monday night time slot. You know, that Monday night time slot that we used to have? We want it back. And CBS said yes. Oh, one other thing about Vivian Vance, the character that she's playing in the 1962 show, she's going to be a divorced woman. First on prime time, a divorced woman. This is right before Betty Friedan publishes the book, The Feminine Mystique. You might remember the book, The Feminine Mystique. Betty Friedan goes back to her 15th year reunion at Smith College and she's a part-time writer and starts interviewing her classmates and finds out that they don't feel good about being housewives, that they threw out a career, and she would interview others, and she would find that would be the sentiment going through the others. She wanted to do this as a magazine article. No magazine wanted to touch it, so she put it out as a book in 1963, and Gloria Steinem was going undercover as a Playboy bunny at that point. Eventually, that would all lead to the formation of the National Organization of Women to advance women's causes, except they didn't look at Lucy. Lucy had advanced women's causes. She broke the glass ceiling. She absolutely broke the glass ceiling. And there is the sidekick, Vivian Vance. In 1962, Desi decided, you know what? I want out of Desi Loeb. And she buys him out. She gets 350 shares of stock. And she buys them out for $2.5 million, which in today's money would be, I don't know, about $20 million, somewhere along that lines. And there is Lucy and Desi Loeb Studios and Desi, and it comes to an end, or so you think. November 1962, Desi resigns as president when his holdings in the company are bought out by Lucy, who succeeded him as president. It's made her the first woman to head a major studio, and she would become one of the most powerful women ever in Hollywood to this day. Although there are more women who are running divisions right now. But she doesn't own CBS or no woman really owns CBS Viacom, and Brian Roberts owns NBC, Comcast, and Rupert Murdoch, Fox, and Disney is run by a man who's a chairman. So there's still some work to do for women, obviously, in Hollywood. So she goes into the syndication business, and she hires this guy, Jay Ward. There's Snidely Whiplash from the Rocky and Bullwinkle show. And her first venture into syndication is Fractured Flickers. But the real money is with Here's Lucy's show, or the Lucy Show. Ball founded Desi Loeb for syndication, which distributed the Jay Ward Productions' Fractured Flickers in 1964. And she makes a key decision. All the people Desi hired, she's keeping them on. She's running the company, and she has the final say. And for the most part, she took their advice. She relied on them except for one idea. Oh, before that, the hair is red. She makes this decision, and the board agrees with her. The Lucy Show. Nobody's doing color television on CBS in 1963-64. But she decides, I'm going to do it in color. NBC's doing stuff in color. This is going to be more valuable down the line. CBS did not want to put color shows on in 1963-64, even though they could. Lucy decided, you know what? I'm putting my shows in color. And you know what? That's going to be great. My shows are in color. And after the first run, I'll be able to sell for more money because they'll be in color. They'll look modern. CBS would continue to broadcast shows in black and white until September 1965. So she's ahead of the game as far as CBS goes. Lucy had realized when the series ended its primetime run, color episodes would get more money when sold in syndication. How powerful was Lucy? The NFL wanted to start Monday Night Football as early as 1966. And networks weren't too interested in Monday Night Football. One of the reasons, Lucy is making a ton of money for CBS on Monday nights. Desi Loeb gets some show proposals in front of them. One of them, Mission Impossible. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. That's going to be a big hit. We'll do that. During Lucille Ball's time as the sole owner of Desilu developed popular series such as Mission Impossible in 1966, Mannix in 1967, and that last one, Star Trek in 1966. Star Trek, a rather interesting concept. Wagon train in space. William Shatner, who just turned 90 years old, Leonard Nimoy back there, who was best friends with my friend, the late Shelley Saltman, growing up in Boston back in the 1930s. And Leonard Nimoy's father, Max, was the local barber who cut everybody's hair. And there is and George Takei is there. He's still, he's on Twitter all the time these days, all these years later. So Lucille Ball has two proposals for, to say yes to. One is Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, and the other is Mission Impossible. The board of directors said, can't do Star Trek. Why can't we do Star Trek? Well, the pilot is too expensive to film. Doesn't worth it. We're not going to make any money. We'll lose money on it. We're not doing it. But Lucy says, yeah, we're doing it. We are doing it. We're doing it. And we're doing it. It's called The Cage. And there is Leonard Nimoy. I think it's good. I think it'll sell. We're going to do it. And the board of the directors said, no. You can't. No, don't do it. Yeah, we're going to do it. Initially, Lucille Ball thought the series was about traveling USO performers and said to the board of directors, here's the money. Get it done. They're like, no. And she said, I'm the boss. Get it done. And Roddenberry says to Lucy, hey, it's Wagon Train to the Stars. Network TV didn't really have any interest in the concept. The Desilu board said the same thing. Not interested, not interested. Lucy said, we're doing it. Remember, Lucy had an eye for talent. She knew what was good because she had gone through all of that, all those bombs that she did on TV, in the movie. She did all of this. And she knew who was talented. She got rejected so many times, but she learned. She didn't go to Harvard Business School or Wharton, but she had the education that for her business was better. And so The Cage goes to NBC. They say, no, we don't like it. However, there's that guy again, Leonard Nimoy, Spock. We like him. Can you do a show based on him? The board of directors says, no way. NBC says, come on, do something where no man has ever gone before. Keep Leonard Nimoy there. And the board of directors says, Lucy, we can't do it. It's going to kill the studio. Lucy says, do it. Do it. Board of directors are besides themselves. She was right. She knew talent. And it got on TV. And today, it's worth billions upon billions of dollars, that franchise. Gulf and Western, or as we used to call it back in the day, Engulf and Devour, Gulf and Western buys out Lucy in 1967. Gulf and Western had purchased Paramount Pictures at around the same time, and it renamed itself Paramount Television. Today, it's called CBS Television Studios. And CBS Television Studios has a piece of jeopardy today. Lucille Ball would go on to perform a new production company. Desi had his own production company, The Mothers-in-Law with Eve Arden. That's probably their most famous show. And she would do that in 1968 and came up with a new series, Here's Lucy. The program ran until 1974. She had several years of rating success, and that was it. She walks away from television at the age of 63. And there is the Here's Lucy show. In 1977, Lucy teaches an 8-week class on comedy at Cal State Northridge. Assistant professor Lucille Ball. The last real big thing she did as a studio boss, Lucy and Tom Cruise. All the right moves. He has everything at stake. He can't afford to lose. He's got to make all the right moves. One of the movies produced by Lucille Ball Productions was a film that Tom Cruise starred in. Ball is listed as an executive co-producer of the movie in 1993. Her second husband, Gary Morton, who she married after Desi, was also a producer, in addition to Philip Goldfarb and Stephen Deutsch. All the Right Moves is about a high school football player, Tom Cruise, vying for a scholarship so he could attend college. His goal, not to end up in the steel mills like his father and brother. Her last appearance was in 1989 at the Emmys. And there she is with her husband, Gary Morton. And that was it. She passed away a little while later. I Love Lucy. Desi said it was just not the title of the show. He did love Lucy. They just couldn't get along. And so does CBS. Lucille Ball paved the way for women to be taken seriously in the television business in the 1950s and 60s. She was the artistic head of Desi Loeb. I Love Lucy was still making money for the company in 2012. The company's boss, Leslie Mouvez, said they were making $20 million annually and still making money today, 64 years after its final show. I Love Lucy changed television. I don't know if she intended on changing TV, but she did change television. She changed it production-wise. She changed it. They moved to LA. She changed it in syndication. And she kept going to become the first network, or rather first studio head, and sold television programs to networks, and eventually had a hit movie. Thank you so much, Katie, for inviting me. Any questions, any comments? I'm all ears right now. Any questions, any comments? Can you hear me?